Hey guys, tonight we step into a cold, misty road where old stones shine under moonlight, distant domes rise like sleeping mountains, and the name Tartaria hangs in the air like a half-remembered dream. Some parts of this journey are widely accepted history, some parts are interpretation, and some parts are calm what-if imagination. We'll move carefully because words like erased, giants and guardians can sound dramatic if handled too loudly, and tonight is not about shouting at the darkness, it is about walking through it with a lantern. The evidence we do have suggests that maps, empires, ruins and rumours often tangle together. Historians debate what certain old labels meant, what people misunderstood, and why some names faded while others survived. And you, friend, probably won't survive this journey if your only equipment is a cracked teacup, one sock, and the confidence of a Victorian explorer who has never packed snacks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Maybe it's midnight in Ohio, dawn in Manila, late evening in Hanoi, or some mysterious hour known only to cats and insomniacs. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin on a road that might once have meant something important. Not a clean road, not a tourist road with helpful signs, polite fences and a gift shop selling tiny brass compasses to people who already have phones. This is older in feeling, if not always in fact. The stones are uneven beneath your boots, damp with mist, and the grass beside them bends under beads of water. Somewhere beyond the fog, a low shape rises, maybe a gate, maybe a ruin, maybe only a hill pretending to be architecture because moonlight is very good at causing misunderstandings. Most historians agree that empires leave traces through roads, settlement patterns, language, coins, maps, fortifications, and sometimes through the heavy silence of places people stopped maintaining. A road is never just a road when it survives long enough. It becomes a question. Who needed to travel here? What did they carry? Salt, fur, silk, weapons, letters, tax records, bread, panic, gossip, the usual human luggage. Archaeology suggests that large networks across Eurasia were shaped not by one hidden empire, but by many peoples moving across enormous distances, trading, raiding, marrying, fleeing, negotiating, and occasionally stopping to complain about weather, which is probably the most universal historical activity, and yet the name Tartaria invites mist. You see it printed across old European maps in forms like Tartary, Great Tartary, Lesser Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Independent Tartary. What's broadly accepted is that these labels were often used by European map makers for vast regions of inner and northern Asia that they did not fully know. The term could be vague, flexible, and sometimes more about distance than detail. It pointed towards steppes, mountains, khanate, routes, frontiers, and peoples who did not always fit neatly into European categories. If a cartographer could not explain a place, the ink still had to go somewhere. So there it went, spread across blankness, like a blanket over a messy room. Very official, very elegant, very much the old world version of "I'll organize this later." One interpretation is that Tartaria became powerful in imagination because it sat between knowledge and uncertainty. It was not only a place on maps, it was a word people used when the known world started to blur. A careful reading might suggest that the mystery does not begin with giants or vanished technology, but with geography itself. When a name covers too much land, it becomes less a boundary and more a mood. And a mood, as any sleepy historian knows, can survive long after the paperwork gives up. You trudge forward, the fog thickens, the stones shine faintly, and the road curves toward a dark outline where broken walls stand like ribs. You imagine travellers coming this way in wool, leather, felt and fur, their carts creaking, their horses breathing clouds into cold air. The smell is damp earth, animal sweat, old smoke from a settlement hidden somewhere ahead. You can almost hear bells tied to harnesses, small and dull, their rhythm slower than a heartbeat. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. so you keep the solid ground separate from the mist. Still, the mist is very committed to being dramatic. Historians still argue whether old European uses of Tartary reflected serious geographic knowledge, loose outsider naming, inherited classical fears, or a mix of all three. There's no full consensus on how much these map labels shaped later legends, but the broad pattern is clear enough. Early modern Europe often described faraway peoples through rumour, trade reports, missionary accounts, military anxiety, and second-hand stories. A place could be real and misunderstood at the same time. That is one of history's favourite tricks. It lets the facts sit at the table while imagination quietly steals the dessert. Then come the giants. Not immediately, not as bodies stepping out of the fog, because that would be rude and also difficult to verify. Instead, they arrive as an idea. A fringe idea proposes that the old land called Tartaria belonged to a vanished advanced civilization, sometimes imagined as having giant people, or giant guardians, or builders whose scale exceeded ordinary human life. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it has become popular in certain online circles, because it gathers together oversized doors, grand old buildings, orphaned architectural styles, World's Fair photographs, old maps, and a general suspicion that something has been left out of the story. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes less a claim and more a dream about scale. And scale matters. When you stand near a monumental gate, even a perfectly explainable one, your body receives the message before your mind does. You feel small, your shoulders lower, your voice becomes quieter. A massive arch does not need a conspiracy to seem supernatural at midnight. It simply needs stone, darkness, and your brain doing its best with limited lighting. A more cautious explanation could be that many giant impressions come from architecture designed to express power. Palaces, cathedrals, railway stations, government halls, and ceremonial gates often used height to humble the visitor. That does not mean giants built them. It means human beings are very good at building things that make other human beings whisper, "Well, that seems excessive." You reach the old gate. Its stones are slick and cold. Moss grows in the seams. There are no inscriptions you can read, only scratches that might be weather, might be tools, might be someone long ago testing a blade while waiting for soup. The arch is tall enough to make your neck ache. You raise the lantern, and the light trembles over the surface. For a moment, you imagine a guardian standing there, not necessarily a giant with bones and boots, but a figure made of memory, a keeper of roads, a watcher between the mapped world and the unknown. What if the story is pointing at something else? What if giants are not only about height, but about the enormous presence left by cultures that outsiders simplified, mislabeled, or feared? The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. You pass beneath the arch. Beyond it, the road continues between low walls. The fog opens and closes. Somewhere far off, an owl calls once, as if approving the pacing. You follow the stones, aware that each step belongs partly to documented history, partly to interpretation, and partly to that soft candlelit "what if" that keeps people listening after midnight. The name Tartaria drifts beside you, not as a hidden truth, but as a puzzle, a wide old word for wide old lands, a label that stretched across maps, a doorway through which rumours later walked, wearing very large shoes. And under your boots the road remains, cold, patient, and slightly inconvenient for ankles. The road carries you toward a room that smells of wax, old paper, and the faint metallic dust of a key that has turned too many locks. You are no longer outside, or perhaps you are only imagining shelter because the fog has become thick enough to feel like walls. A table appears under candlelight. On it rests a map, wide and browned at the edges, its surface wrinkled like dry skin. Seas are painted in pale green, mountains rise in tiny shaded humps, rivers curl like sleeping snakes. And across a vast stretch of land, written with the confidence only old ink can manage, you see the name that has been following you through the mist. Tartary. Not one city, not one kingdom with tidy borders and a helpful welcome sign, A huge word spread across an enormous region, as if the mapmaker dipped a brush into uncertainty and decided to make it look official. Very elegant, very historical, also very similar to labelling your messy closet storage empire and hoping no one asks for details. What's broadly accepted is that early modern European maps often used Tartary for huge areas of Inner Asia, Central Asia, Siberia and regions north of China. These map labels did not always describe a single political state. They could refer loosely to lands associated in European thinking with Tatar and Mongol peoples, steppe confederations, khanates, trade routes and territories beyond regular European contact. Most historians agree that old maps are not neutral photographs of the world. They are documents of knowledge, rumour, power, ambition, and sometimes charming confusion dressed in beautiful lettering. You lean closer. The candle flame trembles, and the ink seems almost alive. A careful reading might suggest that Tartaria became mysterious partly because it looks so definite on paper. A word written across half a continent feels important. It suggests unity. It suggests possession. It suggests that someone, somewhere, knew exactly what it meant. But a more cautious explanation could be that many old maps compressed complicated realities into broad labels because mapmakers worked from partial reports. A trader heard one thing. A missionary copied another. A diplomat repeated something with the confidence of a man who had definitely not been there. Then a cartographer arranged all of it into lines, colours, and names. And once a name enters a map, it gains authority. This is where the dream begins to breathe. Historians still argue whether the word Tartary should be understood mainly as a geographic convenience, a cultural label, a political misunderstanding, or a European projection onto lands they only partly understood. The evidence we do have points to variety rather than one erased empire. Across the regions covered by these old labels, there were khanates, nomadic societies, settled towns, Islamic centers of learning, Buddhist communities, trade cities, Russian expansion, Qing influence, Persian connections, and many local histories that deserve more than one oversized word. In documented history, the map is a simplification. In interpretation, the simplification becomes a seed. In imagination, the seed becomes a forest where giants might stand quietly between the trees. You trace the coastline with one finger, then follow rivers inland. A small part of you expects the map to whisper, because maps in candlelit rooms have terrible manners that way. It does not whisper, it only crackles softly when the air moves. Still, what if the ink itself seems to breathe under candlelight? What if every old label is less a statement and more a doorway? Not proof of a hidden civilization, not confirmation of erased guardians, but a place where uncertainty survived long enough to grow legends. A fringe idea proposes that Tartary was not merely a loose map term, but a lost world power whose achievements were later hidden or absorbed into other histories. This theory isn't widely accepted, but its appeal is easy to understand. Old maps look mysterious. Big architecture looks mysterious. Missing context feels suspicious, especially when presented by someone online with dramatic music and a voice that sounds like they discovered history in a thunderstorm. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. The mainstream view is far simpler. Tartary was a broad and shifting label used by outsiders for regions they did not fully understand. That explanation may not wear a velvet cloak, but it has sturdy shoes. You turn the map slightly. In the upper corner, strange decorative figures hold banners. Sea monsters curl near the margins. A compass rose blooms like a flower. The map is beautiful, and because it is beautiful, it becomes easier to trust than it should be. This is another quiet lesson from history. A document can be visually persuasive and still be incomplete. A border can be drawn with care and still be wrong. A name can be written in perfect script and still hide uncertainty behind its flourishes. You imagine an old cartographer at work, hunched over a desk, trying to fit reports from caravans and embassies into a world that refuses to behave. Snowfields, steppe grass, desert routes, cities with names that change depending on the language of the traveller. Peoples described differently by neighbours, enemies, merchants and officials. The poor man probably needed tea, better lighting and maybe a small nap, but instead he had to create order from fragments. You can respect the effort while still noticing the gaps. One interpretation is that later myths about Tartaria grow from these gaps. When a map says Great Tartary, the modern eye might ask, great in what sense? Great as in large? Great as in powerful? Great as in secretly advanced and guarded by enormous silent people who dislike paperwork? To be clear, this is debated, and the giant guardian idea belongs to speculation rather than accepted history. But speculation often begins when ordinary explanation feels emotionally too small for the scale of the image. A huge name invites a huge story. The candle burns lower. You notice that the map does not erase anyone intentionally, not by itself. But it does flatten countless lives. It smooths languages, borders, alliances, and local memories into one word that looks easier than reality. That may be where the idea of erasure becomes useful, though not necessarily in the dramatic sense. Sometimes history is not erased by villains in dark rooms. Sometimes it is blurred by distance, repeated mistakes, translation, empire, poor archives, lazy categories, and the human desire to simplify anything larger than the kitchen table. And honestly, most of us cannot even keep a kitchen table organized, so judging 17th century Eurasian mapping too harshly feels a little bold. Still, you feel the pull. The name on the map glows amber in the candlelight. Outside the window, fog presses against the glass. You can almost imagine a line of guardians at the horizon, not stepping forward, not announcing themselves, simply standing where certainty ends. The map stretches too far, because the world itself stretched too far for the people trying to capture it. The mystery is not that one hidden truth waits beneath every old label. The mystery is that old labels can outlive their usefulness and become symbols. They become containers for longing, suspicion, wonder, and the soft ache of not knowing. You lower your hand from the parchment. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is the map, the label, the history of distant regions filtered through limited knowledge. The interpretation is that confusion can become legend. The imagination is the candlelit feeling that the ink might still remember footsteps across snow, hooves on frozen roads, and towers at the edge of a world Europeans never fully understood. We're not proving anything tonight, we're following clues. And the clue in front of you is only ink, but under the candle it feels almost warm. You find yourself standing at the base of a building that rises too high for the sleepy part of your brain to measure properly. It may be a railway station, a courthouse, an exhibition hall, or some grand civic dream from a century that adored columns the way modern people adore charging cables. The walls are heavy with ornament. Arches climb above you. Windows stack themselves in rows, each one dark, each one holding a little piece of night. The doorway is large enough to make you pause, not because it proves anything strange, but because scale has a way of tugging at the imagination before reason gets its boots on. Archaeology suggests that monumental buildings usually come from organized labor, skilled engineering, available materials, social hierarchy, money, and time. Most historians agree that people have been building impressive structures for thousands of years without needing to be giants. Temples, pyramids, cathedrals, mosques, palaces, fortresses, and civic halls all show what happens when human communities gather resources around belief, authority, pride, fear, devotion, and the eternal need to impress visitors. A tall door might be practical, symbolic, ceremonial, or simply fashionable. It might welcome crowds, accommodate carriages, create airflow, or announce power. Sometimes architecture says, welcome. Sometimes it says, please feel tiny and behave. You step closer and your boots whisper against grit. Here, the Tartarian mystery shifts from maps into masonry. A fringe idea proposes that giants once guarded lost Tartarian halls, and that enormous doors, high ceilings, and oversized staircases are signs of a world built for larger bodies. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it has a strange dreamlike appeal. You see a doorway twice your height, a stairway broad enough for a procession, a hall with ceilings lost in shadow, and some ancient part of your mind says, very unhelpfully, "Ah yes, enormous people." The mind loves shortcuts. It also loves snacks, but tonight it gets architecture instead. A more cautious explanation could be that humans build large spaces for reasons that have nothing to do with giant occupants. Grand interiors help manage crowds. Tall ceilings reduce heat and smoke. Large doors move goods, animals, banners, statues, religious objects, military formations, or ceremonial vehicles. In cold climates, heavy buildings with thick walls could hold warmth. In hot climates, high spaces allowed air to circulate. In cities, monumental scale displayed wealth and political legitimacy. In churches and temples, height pointed the eye upward, toward heaven, toward authority, or at least toward a ceiling someone had to dust eventually, which feels like a punishment from history. Still you feel the spell. Your lantern trembles across the brickwork. Each brick is ordinary by itself, but together they form something almost stern. The building seems less constructed than accumulated, as if time itself has been stacked and mortared into place. You imagine workers hauling stone, cutting timber, mixing lime, setting scaffolds, measuring angles, arguing over wages, and probably losing tools in ways that made everyone blame the apprentice. This is the documented world, full of labour and skill. It is slower than legend, but deeper. It reminds you that ordinary hands can create extraordinary scale. Historians still argue whether certain monumental designs are best explained through practicality, symbolism, political theatre, religious imagination, or inherited architectural fashion. There's no full consensus in every case because buildings are not simple objects. They are public statements. A palace can be shelter, threat, theatre, workplace, and myth all at once. A courthouse can make law feel ancient even when the plumbing is suspiciously modern. An exhibition hall can borrow Roman arches, Renaissance domes, and industrial steel, then stand there proudly as if it invented civilization before breakfast. You pass through the doorway. Inside, the air cools. The smell is dust, dry wood, old plaster, and a faint trace of iron. Your footsteps return to you from far above, stretched thin by the height of the hall. On the walls, carved patterns twist in shadows. Some might be floral, some might be geometric. Some might be damaged enough to look like faces if you are tired. And honestly, you are walking around a giant dark hall at night. So tired is not the most embarrassing explanation. This is where gentle imagination enters. What if their shadows still lean across abandoned stairways? Not physical giants necessarily. Not hidden skeletons waiting behind a locked municipal door, which would be both alarming and very inconvenient for zoning permits. What if the giants are the feeling of old ambition made visible? What if they are the builders, patrons, workers, and forgotten communities enlarged by memory until they seem taller than life? A careful reading might suggest that giants often appear in folklore when people encounter ruins whose makers are unknown, distant, or misunderstood. When later generations cannot easily explain a structure, they may imagine beings larger than themselves. The explanation becomes a story wearing heavy boots. The evidence we do have points to this pattern in many cultures. Ruins invite legends. Massive stones invite stories of superhuman strength. Old roads become fairy paths. Mounds become burial places of heroes. Towers become the work of kings, spirits, saints, or giants. This does not make the legends useless. It makes them meaningful in another way. They show how people respond to scale, loss, and uncertainty. The mystery isn't always in whether the tale is literally true. Sometimes the mystery is why human beings keep telling it. You climb a staircase. Each step is broad, but not impossible. The banister is smooth under your hand, chilled by night. Dust collects in the corners. Somewhere above, a loose shutter taps softly in the wind. Tap, pause, tap, like a patient finger reminding you not to believe too quickly, but not to dismiss wonder either. We'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. The solid ground says humans built grand things. The mist says those grand things sometimes outgrow their explanations in the imagination. At the landing, you turn and look back over the hall. From here, the floor seems distant. The doorway below looks like the mouth of a cave. Your lantern flame bends in a draught, and for one delicate second, long shadows stretch from the columns, tall enough to look almost human. You know they are shadows. Let me rephrase that more carefully. They might support the feeling of giants, not the fact of giants. That's a possibility, not a certainty. The old hall is not giving testimony, it is only standing there, being dramatic in a way that stone buildings are unfairly good at. A popular rumour claims that some grand buildings were inherited from a lost civilization rather than built by the people credited with them. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it speaks to a real modern unease. Many people look at older craftsmanship and wonder why so much of today's construction feels flatter, cheaper, faster, and less ornamented. One interpretation is that this contrast makes the past feel impossible. But the careful answer is simpler and perhaps sadder. Economics changed, labour systems changed, materials changed, tastes changed, and cities grew at different speeds under different pressures. Beauty did not vanish because giants vanished. It often became too expensive, too slow, or too unfashionable for a world in a hurry. You let that settle. The building around you becomes less like evidence for a hidden race and more like evidence for human patience. Brick by brick, arch by arch. Skilled hands working under rules, budgets, weather, ambition, and exhaustion. If there are guardians here, maybe they are not towering bodies erased from history, but the quiet pressure of memory itself, asking you to look more carefully before turning every mystery into a conclusion. Outside, the fog presses against the windows. Inside, the stairway waits, and somewhere in the dark above, the shadows remain tall. The stairway leads you into the Age of Iron. Not suddenly, because history rarely changes scenes with the neatness of a theatre curtain. It seeps. Stone becomes brick. Brick meets steel. Candlelight gives way to gaslight, then electric glow. The silence of the old hall opens into the faint, imagined noise of pistons, whistles, hammers, and wheels. You step out beneath a vast roof of glass and metal, where beams cross overhead like dark ribs, and the air tastes of coal smoke, rainwater, oil, and restless machinery. A railway station stretches before you. Its platform is long enough to vanish into haze. Iron columns hold up the roof. A clock hangs above the concourse with the solemn expression of an object that has been judging late passengers for generations. Somewhere beyond the glass, a locomotive breathes steam into the night, slow and animal-like. It is not a dragon, of course. It is a machine. But at 2 a.m, with fog curling around its wheels, the difference may feel more like paperwork than reality. The evidence we do have points to 19th century industrial expansion, grand civic architecture, world fairs, railways, telegraph lines, factories, and enormous public works changing cities across Europe, Russia, North America, and parts of Asia. Most historians agree that the 19th century was an age of acceleration. Materials moved faster, people moved farther. Ideas crossed borders with unsettling speed. Iron, glass, brick, and steam became the visual language of modern power. Cities built stations like temples to arrival and departure, which is fitting because missing a train can still produce a spiritual crisis. You walk along the platform. Your boots tap against stone worn smooth by thousands of feet. Travellers seem to gather around you in the imagination. Soldiers in heavy coats, merchants with cases, mothers holding children close, workers with lunch tins, officials with stiff collars, and one man who has absolutely packed too many bags and is making it everyone's problem. The station is documented history in mood and material. Railways did transform trade, migration, warfare, timekeeping, and urban life. Standardized time itself became more important because trains are deeply rude when everyone uses a different clock. Yet the grandness of these places feeds another kind of story. A fringe idea proposes that many 19th century stations, domes, and exhibition buildings were not truly built in the period we assign to them, but inherited from a lost Tartarian civilization or cleaned up after some forgotten catastrophe. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it grows from a real feeling of disbelief. You look at a vast iron roof, stone ornament, carved facades, and old photographs of world fairs rising like temporary dream cities, And you may wonder how such ambition appeared so quickly. A careful reading might suggest that later generations sometimes misread industrial speed as impossibility. Historians still argue whether the grand architecture of the 19th century should be understood mainly as civic pride, imperial theatre, technological optimism, commercial competition, or nostalgic borrowing from older styles. In truth, many of these forces work together. A railway station could be practical and theatrical at the same time. A World Fair pavilion could display industry while pretending to be a palace from a classical dream. A government building could dress modern bureaucracy in ancient columns, perhaps because tax offices feel slightly less depressing when wearing Roman cosplay. You pause beside a machine half hidden in shadow. It might be a generator, a pump, a press, or only a boiler-shaped lump your tired mind has promoted into mystery. Rivets dot its surface. Pipes vanish into walls. A pressure gauge stares blankly through cracked glass. What if the old machines hum like sleeping sentinels? Not because they belong to giants, not because they guard a secret power source buried beneath the city, but because machines, when abandoned, keep the posture of purpose. They look as though they are waiting to be needed again. One interpretation is that machines and monumental architecture together create a guardian feeling. Tall domes watch over public squares. Station clocks regulate movement. Bridges control crossings. Factories shape labour. Waterworks protect cities from disease. Power plants feed light into streets. In this sense, the guardians of the modern age were not giant beings, but systems. Steam, rail, sanitation, electricity, bureaucracy, and all the pipes and schedules nobody appreciates until they fail. It is less glamorous than a forgotten titan, but far more likely to ruin your evening if ignored. The smell of coal thickens. You imagine the world fairs, those grand exhibitions where nations displayed machinery, art, architecture, colonial goods, inventions, and self-confidence polished to a dangerous shine. The documented anchor is clear enough. World's fairs and international expositions did build temporary and permanent structures to showcase technology and culture. Some were designed to overwhelm visitors. Huge halls, glittering lights, exoticized displays, mechanical wonders, fountains, domes, and facades created an atmosphere of almost magical progress. If you walk through one after sunset, when electric lamps glowed against ornamental towers, you might feel that you had entered the future wearing yesterday's shoes. A popular rumour claims that these fairs were covers for rediscovered older structures or remnants of Tartaria. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it points toward a curious visual truth. Many fair buildings were intentionally theatrical. Some used temporary materials made to look permanent. Some were demolished after the event. Some photographs survive without context, leaving modern viewers to wonder why cities built palaces only to remove them. A more cautious explanation could be that the temporary nature was often planned. Exhibition architecture was spectacle, advertisement, and experiment. It was meant to dazzle, not always to endure. History, unfortunately, loves building magnificent things and then saying, well, that was fun, before tearing them down. You move deeper into the station. A dome rises beyond the concourse, pale against the dark. Its ribs gather at the top, like the inside of a shell. Domes have always been good at making humans feel watched by the sky. Roman builders used them. Byzantine builders transformed them. Islamic architects refined and reimagined them. Renaissance and Baroque architects made them symbols of faith, knowledge, and power. 19th century builders borrowed, adapted, and enlarged these forms with new materials. Archaeology and architectural history suggest continuity, revival, imitation, and innovation, not a single hidden source. Still, the mood remains. The dome seems to float above you. The iron beams seem almost too delicate for their burden. The station clock ticks once, though perhaps that is only the building settling. We're not proving anything tonight, we're following clues. And this clue is not a secret machine or a giant footprint. It is the strange emotional force of public architecture built to impress masses of ordinary people at a time when technology itself felt nearly mythic. You stand beside the rails. They run outward into darkness, parallel lines shining faintly. They feel like promises and threats. They can carry wheat, soldiers, letters, children, refugees, machines, mail, fruit, sorrow, gossip, and a sandwich wrapped badly in paper. Railways connected worlds, but they also helped empires expand, resources move, and local lives change under pressures that were not always gentle. Most historians agree that industrial progress came with both wonder and cost. The same station that feels romantic under moonlight may have been noisy, dirty, crowded, unequal, and deeply uncomfortable if you were not travelling first class. That is the grounding wire beneath the mystery. The Guardians of Tartaria, if you imagine them here, do not need to be giants with secret tools. They could be the overwhelming forms of an age that guarded its own myth of progress. Iron roofs, glowing domes, machines at rest, clocks over platforms, public buildings dressed like ancient temples. The erased part may not be a vanished race, but the labour behind the spectacle. Bricklayers, riveters, machinists, cleaners, porters, immigrants, prisoners, servants, and workers whose names rarely appear on the front of the building. You hear the locomotive exhale. Steam rolls along the platform, soft as breath under a blanket. For a moment it hides the rails, the clock, the dome, and your own hands. When it thins, everything is still there, ordinary and marvellous at once. The old machines do not speak, but in the hush they almost hum. The hum fades into paper again. You are in an archive now, or something close to one, where the air is dry enough to make every breath feel slightly borrowed. Shelves rise on both sides, taller than the lantern's reach. Wooden drawers line the walls. Bundles of documents rest under cloth ties. Ledgers sleep with their spines cracked. Rolled maps lean in corners like tired umbrellas after a century of bad weather. Dust lies everywhere in a soft grey patience, and when you move it lifts in tiny glittering swirls, as if the past has decided to become weather. You step between the shelves. The floorboards complain under your boots, but quietly, because even floorboards seem to respect archives. Somewhere above you, rain begins ticking on a roof of slate or tin. The sound is faint, steady and sleepy. You pass labels written in fading ink. Census rolls, tax records, travel accounts, shipping lists, military correspondence, town plans, estate inventories, school registers, church records, court summaries, and boxes of miscellaneous material, which is the archive's way of saying, "Good luck, little scholar." Most historians agree that archives can preserve and distort the past at the same time. They hold pieces of lives that might otherwise vanish, but they rarely hold everything equally. The evidence we do have points to a simple, humbling truth. Records are created by institutions, governments, churches, companies, courts, armies, families, and individuals with their own priorities. Some people are recorded in detail. Others appear only as numbers, nicknames, occupations, complaints, payments, or not at all. What survives is not the whole past. It is a selection shaped by power, chance, disaster, decay, and the deeply annoying habits of mould. You pull open a drawer. Inside lies a stack of index cards, their edges furred with age. Names appear, then vanish. Towns change spelling. Families move. Borders shift. Languages translate badly into other languages, then return wearing unfamiliar coats. A careful reading might suggest that forgotten labels helped fuel the Tartarian mystery. If one century uses Tartary broadly, another divides the same lands into empires, provinces, republics, khanates, and ethnic regions, and a later reader may wonder where the First World went. The answer may be administrative rather than sinister, but administration is history's most underrated magician. It can make places appear, disappear, merge, and split with one document and a person who owns too many stamps. Historians still argue whether certain vanished names represent lost political realities, outsider misunderstandings, evolving geography, translation choices, or later nationalist histories reshaping memory. This is not unusual. Names are unstable things. A land can have one name in a local language, another in an imperial office, another in a merchant's notebook, another on a missionary map, and another in the fears of distant people who have never been there. Tartaria was one of those names that travelled far from precision. It became less a single place and more a container for distance. You find a brittle gazetteer. Its pages smell faintly sweet like old glue and dust. You turn them carefully. The descriptions are confident, but confidence in old books must be handled like a candle near curtains. Some entries are useful, some are outdated, some repeat older errors, some describe peoples with the bias of their time. Most historians agree that older sources can be valuable without being fully reliable. They are not useless, but they are not magic mirrors either. You read them as witnesses, not judges, and in the margins you see the mystery growing. A popular rumour claims that Tartarian names were deliberately removed from books, maps, and public memory. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it speaks to a real feeling that archives often produce, the sense that something has gone missing. You search for a name and find only fragments. You look for a people and find outsiders speaking over them. You look for a city and find several spellings, half a map, a traveller's complaint about mosquitoes, and an argument over whether the road was passable in spring. It is enough to make anyone suspicious, especially if they have had too much coffee and not enough daylight. But a more cautious explanation could be that many missing names faded through ordinary historical processes. Empires expanded. Administrative categories changed. Scientific geography became more precise. Colonial terminology rose and fell. National borders hardened. Languages standardized. Old ethnonyms shifted meaning. Some labels became offensive, outdated, or inaccurate. Others were replaced because political power changed hands. The disappearance of a word from maps does not always mean the disappearance of a civilization. Sometimes it means the map finally stopped using a blanket term and started naming the furniture underneath. You smile at that thought. History is a messy room again, very scholarly, very dusty, slightly in need of a broom. You move farther down the aisle and find a wooden table under a green-shaded lamp. On it lies a city directory from the 19th century. Names crowd the pages in tight columns. Bakers, masons, printers, blacksmiths, widows, teachers, clerks, carpenters, rail workers, hotel keepers, and one unfortunate fellow listed as a dealer in umbrellas, which feels like a business model based on human forgetfulness. The ordinary people are everywhere, but only if you know how to look. They are the builders behind the grand buildings, the porters beneath the railway roof, the cleaners after the exhibition hall closes, the hands that keep the world from becoming only a facade. One interpretation is that the true erasure is not a hidden conspiracy against giants, but the old and common erasure of labour. Grand architecture often preserves the names of patrons, officials, architects, emperors, donors, and institutions. The workers who carried brick, mixed mortar, carved stone, laid track, polished brass, cooked meals, stitched uniforms, and swept floors often vanish into silence. If you are searching for guardians, perhaps they are here in the ledgers, not enormous, not supernatural, but countless. Small names carrying enormous weight. Still, the archive has a way of encouraging imagination. What if each missing name feels like a door left slightly open? What if the blank space after a burned register, the torn corner of a map, the faded ink of a village name, or the lost file of a demolished building becomes an invitation to dream? We'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. The solid ground says archives are incomplete for many ordinary reasons. The mist says incompleteness feels personal when you are standing alone among shelves at night. A fringe idea proposes that hidden custodians removed evidence of a giant Tartarian past from libraries and museums. This theory isn't widely accepted, and the evidence is thin. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. Yet the emotional engine behind the theory is understandable. People do not like gaps. Gaps feel like concealment. Missing records feel like locked doors. But not every locked door hides a giant. Some hide tax disputes, damaged plumbing reports, or a box of receipts so boring they could sedate a horse. You turn another page. The ink has faded almost brown. A town name appears under one spelling, then another in a later document. The place did not vanish. The language around it changed. The people may have remained, moved, blended, suffered, adapted, or left traces under different names. This is suggestive, not conclusive, and it matters because history is often less like a clean timeline and more like a river delta. Channels split, mud builds, old roots dry, New ones appear. The map changes while water keeps moving. The rain on the roof becomes softer. You sit at the table and let the documents rest under your hands. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. Documented. Old maps used broad names. Archives preserve uneven fragments and political labels change. Interpreted. Those changes may make later readers feel that something was hidden. Imagined. A row of unseen guardians moving silently between shelves, not to conceal the past, but to protect its fragile papers from our impatience. You lower the lantern. The archive does not answer every question. It rarely does. It offers names, dates, corrections, contradictions, and a great deal of dust. It asks you to slow down. It asks you to notice when a mystery is real and when it is born from missing context. It asks you to resist the easy thrill of saying everything was erased, while still honouring the ache of what truly has been lost. Outside, rain keeps time. Inside, the labels sleep. And somewhere in the silence, a missing name feels like a door that has not fully closed. The door opens onto wind. You step out of the archive and into a wide, pale landscape where grass bends under a low sky. The air is colder here. It smells of dust, horsehair, smoke, and distant rain. No walls rise around you now. No shelves, no domes, no railway roof holding the night in place. Only the open steppe stretching so far that the horizon seems less like an edge and more like a thought someone forgot to finish. A watchtower stands ahead. It is not especially tall, not compared with the grand halls and iron stations already waiting in your memory, but out here it feels important. It leans slightly into the wind. Its stones are worn, its ladder missing several rungs, its upper platform dark against the sky. A strip of cloth tied to a broken post flutters and snaps softly. You approach slowly because lonely towers have a talent for making even sensible people feel like they are entering a story. What's broadly accepted is that steppe peoples, frontier soldiers, merchants, envoys, herders, monks and travellers shaped Eurasian history across centuries. Most historians agree that the regions once loosely called Tartary were not empty blanks waiting for outsiders to define them. They were crossed by trade routes, political alliances, military campaigns, religious movements, seasonal migrations, and complicated relationships between settled and nomadic societies. The evidence we do have points to a living frontier, not a silent lost empire with one simple name. You walk through dry grass. It brushes your legs with a whispering sound. Somewhere far off you imagine the dull rhythm of hooves. Maybe a caravan moves under grey morning. Maybe riders watch from a ridge. Maybe a messenger carries news sealed in cloth. Maybe someone is just trying to find a goat with the patience of a saint and the vocabulary of a very tired farmer. History is grand, yes, but it is also full of practical problems involving animals that refuse to cooperate. A more cautious explanation could see guardians as memory turned symbolic. The guardians at the edge of empire may not be giants in the literal sense. They may be frontier communities who guarded roots, languages, customs, faiths, markets and borders. They may be soldiers in watchposts, merchants who knew the safe wells, guides who understood mountain passes, mothers preserving songs, scribes copying names, herders reading weather in the grass. If we treat the guardian idea as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a way to honour protection, endurance and memory without forcing the evidence to carry more than it can hold. Historians still argue whether frontiers should be understood mainly as hard borders, zones of exchange, spaces of conflict or cultural meeting grounds where identities constantly changed. In many cases, a frontier was all of these at once. A line on a map might look firm, but on the ground it could be porous, negotiated, ignored, defended, crossed, taxed, raided, married across, and misunderstood. A border drawn in ink is tidy. A border lived by humans is usually a little muddy and extremely inconvenient for anyone trying to make a simple documentary graphic. You reach the tower. The stones are rough under your hand. Lichen grows in pale coins across the surface. From here you can see a shallow valley, a track worn through grass, and the faint remains of what might have been a camp, a market stop, or a defensive outpost. Archaeology suggests that frontier life often leaves traces in fortifications, ceramics, hearths, animal bones, metal objects, coins, and burial practices. But those traces can be scattered and quiet. They do not always tell you who felt afraid, who felt at home, who missed someone, who lied about the weather, or who made the best stew within 50 miles. A popular rumour claims that the Guardians of Tartaria were literal giants stationed at the borders of an advanced hidden world. This theory isn't widely accepted, and the evidence is thin, but the image is powerful. Enormous figures standing beside towers, watching the road, protecting a civilization from invaders, flood, fire, or forgetting. What if you meet them beside a wind-bent watchtower, not as bodies you can measure, but as silhouettes made by distance? The wind lengthens everything out here. Grass becomes waves, stones become teeth. A lone rider becomes a legend if you see him from far enough away. You climb the tower carefully. The ladder complains, which is fair, because you are asking a very old object to support your curiosity. At the top, the wind pushes against your coat. The world opens in every direction. You begin to understand why outsiders looking at these lands from afar might have filled them with fear, admiration, rumour, and misunderstanding. The steppe does not offer easy boundaries. It asks you to think in movement. Herds move, camps move, armies move, markets move, news moves, songs move, even power moves, rising and dissolving through alliances, conquests, dynasties, and trade. One interpretation is that European writers often transformed mobile societies into simplified labels, because mobility challenged the settled imagination. A city with walls feels easy to name. A people whose strength lies in movement feels harder to capture on a map. A careful reading might suggest that the giant of Tartaria is partly the size of the unknown itself. The less precisely outsiders understood these lands, the larger the idea became. You look down at the road. It is narrow here, just 2 pale tracks through grass. Still, it carries weight. Along such routes came horses, wool, metal goods, tea, furs, silk, religious texts, weapons, officials, rumours, disease, stories, and technologies. Most historians agree that Eurasian exchange was never the work of one people alone. It was layered, contested, and shared. No single myth can hold it all. No single map label can do justice to the lives moving beneath it. The watchtower creaks in the wind. For a moment you imagine a guardian beside you, large not in body, but in presence. He might be a frontier scout wrapped in felt. She might be a trader's daughter who knows 3 languages and the price of salt in 2 markets. They might be a monk carrying manuscripts, a soldier counting fires on the horizon, a herder reading storms by smell. They do not speak. They only look outward, as if protecting the road from being forgotten. That's a possibility, not a certainty. To be clear, this is debated. The guardian image belongs to interpretation and imagination, not established archaeology. But it helps you feel something true about frontiers. They are not empty edges. They are places where worlds touch, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, often confusingly. They create people who know how to survive between systems. And if later stories call those people giants, perhaps it is because memory has enlarged them to match the vastness they crossed. The wind softens. You climb down from the tower, boots landing in dust. The strip of cloth still flutters above you. The road bends toward a darker line in the distance, maybe trees, maybe a town, maybe another archive waiting under another roof. You carry with you the smell of dry grass and smoke, the sound of hooves that may never have been there, and the sense that the guardians of this landscape were not erased so much as simplified. A giant, after all, can be a person made too large by legend, or a world made too small by a map. The road drops from the wind-bent tower toward the city beneath your feet. At first, there is nothing strange about it. A street lies ahead, quiet under a dim sky. Brick buildings lean close together. Window glass reflects the last weak colour of evening. A drain grates softly with rainwater. Somewhere nearby, a horse might be stepping through mud, or perhaps it is only your memory borrowing a sound from another century. The air smells of wet stone, coal soot, old timber, and that unmistakable city scent of too many lives stacked too close together. You walk along the pavement. It is uneven in places, patched in others, with newer slabs sitting above older brick. At the edge of one building, a basement window sits half below the sidewalk, its upper pane cloudy with dirt. Another structure has a door sunken below street level, reached by a short stairwell with iron railings. Rainwater gathers there in a shallow black pool. The place feels ordinary enough, and yet it carries one of the most powerful engines of the Tartarian imagination, the sense that the ground has risen, that another city waits under the visible one, that the pavement is not a floor but a lid. Archaeology suggests that fires, floods, rebuilding, demolition, landfill, street grading and urban layering can bury earlier streets over time. Most historians agree that cities are not fixed objects. They are constantly repaired, raised, cut open, filled in, drained, paved, widened and rebuilt. Roads are resurfaced, cellars become ground floors become basements, hills are shaved down, low places are filled, riverbanks are extended. After disasters, builders sometimes start again on top of what remains, because clearing everything perfectly is expensive, slow and generally unpopular with anyone who owns a shovel and a deadline. You pause beside a window half swallowed by the sidewalk. A popular rumour claims that whole Tartarian cities were deliberately covered by mud, silt or engineered burial, hiding the true scale of old buildings. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it has become one of the most visually persuasive parts of the mystery. Photographs of partially buried doors, low windows, underground passages and old facades with strange floor levels seem to whisper, "Look closer." And honestly, they do deserve a closer look. Not because they prove a hidden empire, but because old cities are complicated, and complications are where both scholarship and imagination like to sit down with tea. A more cautious explanation could be that many so-called buried buildings reflect known urban processes. Street levels were raised to improve drainage. Flood-prone districts were filled. Basements were built intentionally for storage, kitchens, servants' workspaces, coal workshops or cooling. Some buildings were altered when roads were regraded. In cold climates, snow, mud and poor drainage made street surfaces miserable, so cities tried to improve them. In rapidly growing industrial centres, infrastructure was often layered in chaotic ways. Gas pipes, sewers, water mains, telegraph lines, and later electrical conduits turned the ground into a very crowded sandwich. A terrible sandwich, to be clear. Do not eat the historical infrastructure sandwich. Historians still argue whether certain buried urban features are best explained by planned street raising, flood recovery, construction reuse, basement design, economic shortcuts, or later misinterpretation of photographs without context. The answer changes from city to city and block to block. That is inconvenient for dramatic theories but useful for truth. A sunken window in one place might reflect street grading, in another it might reflect a basement apartment, in another flood deposits, in another a building whose original entrance was moved. History enjoys variety. It refuses to become a single neat explanation, probably because it knows that would make everyone too comfortable. You descend a narrow stair beside an old brick wall. The steps are slick. The iron railing is cold enough to sting your palm. Below the sidewalk, the city sounds become muffled. A carriage or cart passes above, its vibration trembling through the stone. You reach a lower doorway, its frame damp, its threshold worn. For a moment you imagine another street down here, an earlier level where people once walked under open sky. What if the pavement under your feet is only the roof of another world? This is gentle imagination. The documented ground says cities layer themselves. The interpreted angle says those layers can feel like concealment when their reasons are forgotten. The imagined mood says a sleeping city might exist below, with shop signs still hanging, lamps still waiting, and guardians moving quietly through covered streets. We're not proving anything tonight, we're following clues. And the clue here is not one giant catastrophe, but the strange way ordinary rebuilding can look extraordinary after enough time has passed. You enter a low room. It might be a basement storage space, or the lower level of an old shop. Brick arches support the ceiling. Moisture beads on the walls. The floor smells of clay and coal dust. A few wooden shelves sag under the weight of forgotten jars, broken tools, and a crate that looks like it contains either antique hardware or one very disappointed raccoon. You decide not to check. Sleep-friendly history has limits. One interpretation is that the flooded city idea grows from a real human discomfort with buried evidence. When we see a window below ground, we feel that something went wrong. When we see tunnels under streets, we imagine escape routes, secret networks, hidden civilizations, or at minimum a very dramatic municipal planning meeting. Some of these spaces truly were used for fascinating purposes: storage, drainage, transport, utilities, markets, cellars, service corridors, and sometimes shelter. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm for every single brick-lined passage. A fringe idea proposes that a mudflood or concealed catastrophe buried Tartarian structures worldwide, leaving only upper stories visible. This theory isn't widely accepted, and the evidence does not support one global event of that kind. Let me rephrase that more carefully. Certain local floods, fires, earthquakes, landslides, rebuilding campaigns, and street modifications might support the idea that some places changed ground level dramatically, but they do not make a universal hidden history conclusive. This is suggestive, not conclusive. A puzzle in one neighborhood is not automatically a lost empire under every sidewalk. Still, you let yourself feel the strangeness. Above you, footsteps pass. The people up there may never think about the bricks below them. They hurry to work, carry groceries, check messages, spill coffee, complain about parking, and live entirely on the surface. Below, the old walls hold cooler air. The city becomes vertical, layered like memory. The present is not replacing the past exactly. It is standing on it, sometimes literally, with the casual confidence of someone stepping on a trapdoor and saying, "This is probably fine." You move through another arch. Water trickles somewhere in the dark. A pipe ticks as it cools. The sound recalls the old station, the hum of machines, the archive rain, the wind at the tower. Each place has offered a different kind of guardian: roads, maps, buildings, systems, names, frontiers. Here the guardian is the ground itself, holding what people forgot to remove, what they could not afford to clear, what disaster left behind, and what later generations misunderstood. You climb back toward the street. As your head rises above sidewalk level, the city opens around you again. Lamps glow. Rain shines on stone. The half-buried windows look less like proof of giants and more like reminders that cities grow upward, downward, and sideways through time. Yet the feeling remains. Beneath every ordinary step, something older may be resting. Not necessarily Tartaria, not necessarily guardians, but traces, foundations, cellars, ash layers, broken bottles, lost coins, animal bones, names with no plaques. You stand still and listen. The pavement is quiet, but tonight it feels deep. The street grows quieter as the rain thins into mist. You walk away from the half-buried windows, leaving the lower rooms behind, though their cool dampness seems to follow you in memory. The city does not vanish all at once. It softens. Brick edges blur. Lamp halos widen. The pavement glistens with shallow reflections, and each step carries you farther from the noise of machines, archives, maps, and watchtowers toward the gentler question waiting at the end of the road. What do we do with the giants? Not the loud version of them, not the version that demands certainty where the evidence is thin, not the version that turns every old arch, every tall door, every buried window, and every forgotten map label into a single hidden answer. A more careful journey leaves room for wonder without asking wonder to pretend it is proof. Most historians agree that legends often grow where evidence is incomplete. A ruin loses its builders, a map loses its context, a city raises its streets, a name changes language, an archive preserves one life and forgets another. Into those openings imagination steps softly, carrying a lantern. You pass beneath a row of dark trees. Water drips from the branches. Somewhere, far away, a train whistle seems to echo, though perhaps it is only wind moving through an alley. The old motifs return in small ways: the slick stone road, the breathing ink, the tall shadows on stairways, the sleeping machines, the missing archive names, the cloth snapping on the tower, the pavement that felt like a roof. None of them gives you a single hidden truth. Together, they form a pattern of longing. You want the past to be whole. Everyone does. A complete past would be so convenient. It would come with labels, subtitles, clear lighting, and maybe a friendly person in a vest saying, "This way to the exact answer." History, unfortunately, prefers fog. Scholars continue to debate how myth, memory, architecture, and identity combine to create legends of vanished peoples. Historians still argue whether stories of giants usually reflect ancient encounters with ruins, symbolic language for powerful ancestors, misunderstood fossils, religious imagination, social memory, or the simple human habit of making old things larger in the mind. The evidence we do have points to many causes rather than one. In some traditions, giants represent chaos. In others, they represent ancestors, builders, enemies, heroes, or beings from an earlier age. They are often less about height than about distance. They belong to a time before the present world felt settled. A fringe idea proposes that the giants of Tartaria were real guardians erased from history. This theory isn't widely accepted, but if we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, we can ask what feeling it preserves. Maybe it preserves awe before old architecture. Maybe it preserves distrust of incomplete records. Maybe it preserves grief for cultures flattened by outsider labels. Maybe it preserves the strange discomfort of realizing that modern people did not invent ambition, beauty, engineering, or complexity. That can be a humbling thing. The past does not need to be secretly superhuman to make us feel small. Ordinary human history is already enormous. You stop at the edge of the city. Beyond the last houses, the road continues into a wide open darkness. The fog lies low over the fields. No giant steps from it. No guardian raises a hand. No hidden empire announces itself in golden letters. And perhaps that is better. A mystery can remain gentle when it does not have to become a verdict. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. We'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. The solid ground says Tartary was a broad historical label, old maps were imperfect, monumental buildings had human builders, cities layer themselves, and archives are incomplete. The mist says those facts still leave room for mood, memory, and wonder. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. Documented are the maps, the roads, the empires, the industrial cities, the frontier exchanges, the buried layers, and the changing names. Interpreted is the idea that confusion, loss, and scale gave birth to the Tartarian myth. Imagined is the quiet line of guardians walking beside you, not to deceive, not to frighten, but to remind you that the past is never as flat as a page. You begin to understand that erased giants may not be erased bodies at all. They may be erased labour, erased local names, erased context, erased patience, erased wonder. They may be the builders forgotten behind the patron statue, the communities hidden beneath a foreign map label, the workers beneath the iron dome, the travellers crossing the steppe without leaving polished monuments behind. If there are guardians here, they guard the feeling that history should be approached slowly, not conquered, not grabbed, not shouted into a theory before it has finished speaking, just approached. The road fades into silver-grey mist now, and your steps become slower. The cold air no longer bites. It only brushes your face. The lantern in your hand burns lower, its flame bending softly, as if even fire is getting sleepy. Behind you, the city settles into itself. The buried windows darken. The station clock stops judging everyone for being late. The archive closes its drawers. The watchtower stands with its strip of cloth moving gently in the night. The map lies quiet under a last pool of candlelight, and the name Tartaria rests there. No longer a claim, no longer a warning, only an old word with too much sky inside it. You do not need to solve every shadow before you sleep. Some shadows are only trees, some are walls, some are memories made tall by distance, and some are simply the mind's way of saying that the world was wider before morning came and sorted everything into errands, weather, breakfast, and emails. Very heroic emails, naturally, the kind ancient guardians definitely would have ignored. So let the giants sleep. Let them be stone, story, rumour, symbol, worker, traveller, map-maker and dream. Let them shrink back from certainty and return to the edges where they belong. Let the fog cover the road not as a cover-up, but as a blanket. Let the city breathe under its layers. Let the old machines cool. Let the rain soften the dust in the archive. Let every missing name rest for now, not forgotten, but no longer chased. And as the night grows quieter, you can imagine yourself standing beneath that first old arch one final time. The stones are damp. The road is patient. The guardian beside it is only a shadow, and that is enough. You pass under without fear, carrying no proof, no panic, no heavy conclusion, only the calm awareness that history is deep, human beings are strange, and wonder does not need to shout to be heard. The lantern dims, the mist folds closed, and the giants, whatever they were, become part of the dark again.